Hello, I'm Abigail, and this evening I want to tell you an interesting parable about self-confidence and faith. Enjoy. In the vast kingdom of Eldoria, where golden spires pierced the sky and rivers sang sweet melodies, there lived a king named Cedric. King Cedric ruled the land with power. However, he was arrogant and haughty. From the balcony of his palace, as he looked out over his kingdom, he felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. Eldoria was a prosperous and peaceful land. His subjects were loyal to him, and everything flowed according to his will. He felt like the happiest person in the world. One starlit evening, as King Cedric sat on his gilded throne, a thought emerged like a drop of dew on a morning leaf. In the realm of the kingdom, I stand as the beacon of joy. Unlike my subjects, financial concerns do not cloud my horizon. A bounty of delicious food graces my table each day, and entertainers constantly delight my senses with their performances. With all that I possess, I'm confident that there's no one in the kingdom who matches my fortune. Surely, no one can be happier than I am. To ascertain the truth of his belief, King Cedric decided on a plan. Every night, under the velvety cloak of darkness, he would don a simple cloak and walk the cobbled streets of Eldoria. He would sneak behind the warm, inviting homes of his subjects, placing his ear close to their windows, eager to catch a snippet of their daily concerns and challenges. On the first night, he stood behind a bakery where the scent of fresh bread wafted out. He overheard the baker lamenting, "Oh, how my loaves did not rise as they should today. My customers will be disappointed. Why is this trade so difficult?" Walking further, King Cedric stopped by a cottage with ivy-covered walls. From within, he heard the soft voice of a man saying, "I've written to the palace thrice now. My village needs a new bridge, and I can't get the assistance we require. What am I to do?" And so it went, night after night. From the seamstress fretting over a mismatched thread to the fisherman anxious about the changing currents, King Cedric came to realize that each individual, no matter their station, had worries unique to their lives. On one of his nightly strolls, during which he took peculiar satisfaction in observing the troubles of others, King Cedric came across a modest dwelling, a humble abode almost embedded within the earth. The house was unlike any other in Eldoria. Its sunken windows were level with the ground, capturing every passing shadow. The roof, aged by time, showed signs of neglect, with tiles missing and others threatening to give way. Yet, in the heart of this modest dwelling, there was a sight that made King Cedric stop, stare, entranced. Within, framed by the dim glow of a solitary candle, sat a man with a violin cradled lovingly against his shoulder. The melodies that emanated from the strings were so faint, so delicate, that King Cedric found himself leaning in, straining his ears to catch the ethereal notes that danced in the air like fireflies. Beside the violinist, a rustic table held a simmering cauldron from which an inviting aroma wafted, hinting at rich wine. Bowls of food, simple yet delicious, were spread out, showcasing loaves of bread, cheese, and fresh fruits. The man's face was the epitome of contentment. Every note he played seemed to mirror the rhythm of his heart, full of joy and devoid of any worldly worry. The king was both agitated and intrigued. Here was a man in a dwelling many would deem modest, playing tunes that were barely audible, yet he exuded a happiness greater than anyone in the kingdom the king had ever seen. As King Cedric stepped over the threshold of the small dwelling, the warm, inviting glow inside contrasted with the dark, silent world outside. The man with the violin rose from his spot, his face breaking into a broad smile. "Greetings, traveler," he said, his voice as melodious as his music. The king, maintaining his incognito, nodded in return. "Good evening. Your music brought me here. It's a melody that speaks of contentment." The violinist chuckled. "Ah, music is the voice of the soul, and my soul is quite pleased with life." King Cedric's eyes were drawn to the cauldron and the spread of food. The aroma was intoxicating. The violinist, noticing his gaze, gestured towards the table. "Please join me. There's enough for both of us." As they sat down, the king was handed a goblet filled with rich wine, and a plate full of simple and delicious stew. The evening went on, the king and the violinist exchanging tales and laughing at shared jokes. For those few hours, King Cedric felt the weight of his crown lift, replaced by the simple joys of companionship and music. When night deepened and the candles' glow dimmed, the king, exhausted from his day's adventures, lay down on a makeshift bed, lulled to sleep by the comforting ambience of the house. He witnessed firsthand the unburdened sleep of the violinist, a man who had not a care in the world. Dawn broke, casting a golden hue over Eldoria. As the birds began their morning symphony, both men rose. The violinist, ever the gracious host, accompanied King Cedric to the door. Intrigued and deeply moved by the previous night's experience, King Cedric asked, "Your happiness and contentment are evident, but tell me, how do you manage to sustain this life?" The violinist grinned. You see, I've mastered the art of mending. I can't craft something from scratch, but give me something broken, and I can breathe life back into it. Every morning I set out, offering my skills. By midday, if I've earned 5 or 6 gold coins, I consider it a day, well, spent. It's enough for my simple tastes, good food, fine wine, and the joy of music. King Cedric, though enlightened and compassionate, was still a man of curiosity and whims. As he made his way back to the palace, a mischievous thought crept into his mind. What would happen? He wondered if the violinist's sole source of livelihood was taken away. Would his happiness remain unshaken? With this thought in mind, he reached the palace and summoned his council. Without revealing the true reason behind his decree, he proclaimed, "Henceforth, no citizen of Eldoria shall have their belongings repaired by another. They must either mend it themselves or procure a new one." News of the royal decree spread like wildfire. Streets that were once filled with repair shops and craftsmen, ready to breathe new life into old items, suddenly went silent. Many were baffled by this sudden proclamation, but none dared to question the wisdom of the king. The violinist, waking up to another day of hopeful mending, soon realized the impact of the decree. The morning sun cast a soft golden glow on the streets of Eldoria as the violinist set out, hope kindling in his heart. He was aware of the king's decree, but believed that perhaps someone somewhere might still need his skills. However, as he walked down the familiar paths and alleys, the reality of the proclamation became evident. Everywhere he went, he was met with the same response. The townspeople, bound by loyalty to the king, regretfully turned him away. Yet, despite the unexpected setback, the violinist's spirit remained unbroken. The universe has its plans, he murmured to himself, placing his trust in a higher power. As he wandered, he came across a man, brow furrowed with concentration, attempting to chop wood. The strokes were uneven and clumsy, clearly the work of someone unfamiliar with the task. Approaching the man, the violinist inquired, "Pardon me? Sir, but is it befitting for someone of your stature to be chopping wood?" The gentleman, looking exasperated, replied, "I sought someone to prune these trees for me, but with the new decree, finding skilled labor has become a challenge. Left with no choice, I've taken the task upon myself." Seizing the opportunity, the violinist offered, "Hand me the axe, and I promise to do a job that'll please you." With a grateful nod, the man handed over the tool. True to his word, the violinist demonstrated an unexpected knack for the task. His strokes were precise and rhythmic, turning the once daunting task into an art. By the time he was done, the trees were pruned perfectly, leaving the gentleman in awe. As a token of his appreciation, he handed the violinist a gold coin. Realizing the potential in this newfound skill, the violinist spent the day offering his services throughout the town. By sunset, he had earned 6 gold coins, enough to procure food and wine, just like before. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the gentle tunes of the violin once again wafted through the streets of Eldoria. The music spoke of resilience, adaptation, and unwavering faith, and the violinist, with his heart full of gratitude, played on, a testament to the belief that happiness is not bound by circumstance, but is a choice we make every day. As the evening shadows lengthened, King Cedric once again found himself drawn towards the modest home of the violinist. Just like before, he beheld a sight of contentment. The man, his music, and a spread that spoke of life's simple joys. The king's entrance into the house was met with a warm greeting, just like the previous time. The evening proceeded in the same familiar, comforting manner, with food, drink, and the gentle notes of the violin lulling them both into a peaceful slumber. With the first light of dawn, the two men rose. Before parting, King Cedric, burning with curiosity, inquired about the source of the violinist's recent provisions. The man narrated his foray into tree chopping and how it had become his new means of sustenance in light of the king's decree. A myriad of emotions played across King Cedric's face. On one hand, he admired the violinist's adaptability and resilience. On the other, the mischievous itch returned. What if the source of this man's happiness was once again altered? The king mused. Shortly after returning to the palace, a new decree was issued. No citizen of Eldoria was permitted to chop or carve trees. The king's motives remained his own secret, but the implications were felt far and wide. The once bustling timber yards fell silent. Carpenters and craftsmen grumbled, their work now limited. The violinist, hearing of the new decree, felt a pang of despair. His recent venture, which had brought him both joy and sustenance, was now forbidden. He pondered, how will I sustain myself? The universe tests me yet again, but just as before, he chose not to wallow in self-pity. Instead, he decided to lean into his unwavering faith, believing that another path would reveal itself, just as it had before. In the heart of Eldoria, where cobbled streets met meandering alleys, the violinist chanced upon a man, shoulders hunched with exertion, as he toiled away cleaning a cow pen. The muck was thick, and the summer sun did little favors. Sweat streaked down the man's brow, darkening the dirt beneath. "Why, good sir," began the violinist, his voice filled with genuine curiosity, "do you immerse yourself in such a task, attending to the animal's mess?" The man paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "It's a simple matter of necessity," he explained, fatigue evident in his eyes. "I searched high and low for someone to assist, but it seems all hands are occupied. Thus, I've no choice but to manage the chore myself." The violinist, always one to see opportunity in adversity, extended his hand. "Permit me, then, to shoulder this burden for you." The man, a mixture of relief and surprise on his face, gratefully handed over the tools. With determination, the violinist set to work. Despite the grimminess of the task, he tackled it with the same grace and dedication he put into his music. And soon, the cow pen was as pristine as one could hope. Gratitude shone bright in the man's eyes as he handed over 2 glittering golden coins. With renewed spirit, the violinist continued his day, cleaning various quarters throughout the town. By the time the sun kissed the horizon, he had amassed a total of 6 shining gold coins. With his earnings, he procured wine that sparkled ruby, bread, and a lavish spread of food that would make any gourmet's heart sing. In his humble abode, the evening was filled with merriment as he dined in the golden glow of candlelight. The king approached the violinist's dwelling. What he witnessed left him flabbergasted. The same man whom he thought he had cornered with his decrees played his violin with an unblemished joy. Stepping inside, the king's voice carried a hint of frustration. "How, after all edicts, do you continue to find happiness and sustenance?" The violinist, pausing his tune, recounted his day, detailing how he turned adversity into prosperity. King Cedric departed the humble dwelling, a storm of emotions raging within. The simple melodies from the violinist's abode contrasted starkly with the turmoil in his heart. Why? He pondered. When I possess all the riches and power, do I not know the happiness this man has with his simple violin? Determined to challenge the violinist further, By dawn, another decree was issued forbidding the cleaning of animal pens. As morning light painted golden streaks across the cobblestones, the violinist once again set forth. This day he sought cowpen in need of cleaning, but news travels fast, especially when it concerns royal decrees. Before he could even knock on a door, a local merchant informed him, "Haven't you heard? The king's edict forbids any cleaning of cowpen." Bewildered but undeterred, the violinist pondered his next move. As he ambled through the marketplace, he came across a recruitment tent bearing the emblem of Eldoria's army. He paused, watching as the minister of the army spoke with potential recruits. While some men looked apprehensive, bound by duty to serve, others negotiated terms and rates, the promise of gold coins glittering in their eyes. Inspiration struck the violinist. If he couldn't earn as a cleaner or a craftsman, perhaps he could serve as a mercenary soldier. After all, he had heard tales of brave mercenaries who served not out of obligation, but for the thrill of adventure and the weight of gold in their pockets. With determination, he approached the minister and inquired about joining as a mercenary. The minister, ever keen to add to his ranks, looked the violinist up and down. "Can you wield a sword?" he asked. With a nod, the violinist was handed a gleaming blade and a set of armor. Soon he found himself among a band of mercenaries guarding the palace gates, escorting dignitaries, and ensuring the safety of Eldoria's citizens. His day was filled with duties he had never imagined, but he undertook each with the same fervor he reserved for his music. As evening approached, his service concluded and he was generously compensated for his day's work. Slipping out of the armor, the weight of gold coins in his pouch brought a familiar smile to his face. With his earnings, he once again procured the finest wine and a sumptuous feast. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the king, in his grand chamber, was preparing to embark on his customary evening stroll to the violinist's house. But something caught his eye. From a balcony of the palace, the king spotted a familiar face amidst the guards outside the royal harem. There he was, the violinist, standing tall with a sword at his side, every bit the dignified soldier. The glint of the setting sun against the blade seemed to mock the king's every attempt to outwit the persistent man. The sight stirred a tempest of emotions within the king. On one hand, there was frustration. How was it that this fiddler, with the odds stacked against him, always found a way to not just survive, but thrive? But deeper, beneath layers of envy and anger, there was an inkling of admiration. The fiddler's resilience, his tenacity to find joy and purpose even in the direst of circumstances, was truly remarkable. The king's heart grew heavy. Here was a man who, with little to his name, was able to adapt, find happiness and contentment in every situation. And there he stood, the king, surrounded by opulence and luxury, yet consumed by discontent and envy. Instead of descending to the fiddler's dwelling that night, the king chose to retreat to his chambers, lost in introspection. The king pondered for a moment, thinking that with a bit more pressure, the fiddler would surely despair. "I must issue more decrees to make things difficult for him," the king mused. And then the fiddler will be downtrodden, and I will remain the happiest person in the kingdom. Acting on this thought, the king decided the very next day not to pay any of the kingdom's guards. The palace was abuzz with the new royal edict. Word spread quickly among the royal guards and soldiers. The town criers made their rounds, announcing the king's latest decree. On this day, none in the king's service shall receive their due payment. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the streets as men who had stood guard all night and those preparing for their day's duty realized they wouldn't receive a coin for their hard work. The fiddler, just off from his guard duty, heard the decree. Instead of being overtaken by frustration, he took a deep breath, his ever-present optimism shining through. For while the king assumed that by withholding the fiddler's wages, he would crush his spirit, the fiddler viewed each challenge as an opportunity. That night, the king approached the fiddler's cabin and, upon entering, stood stunned. The fiddler sat contentedly with a plate of food in front of him and a full glass of wine. The king was at a loss. He couldn't fathom how the humble fiddler managed to procure a meal this time. Taking a seat, he looked at the fiddler, his eyes searching for any trace of deception. But all he found was the ever-present gleam of honesty and happiness in the man's eyes. The fiddler, pausing from his playing, took a deep breath and began recounting his day. After hearing the decree and realizing I wouldn't be paid today, I didn't let despair consume me. The fiddler began. Instead, I thought of a way to sustain myself. I remembered stories of old where soldiers in desperate times would pawn their swords for sustenance. While I didn't want to part with my entire sword, I realized the blade could be of value. He went on. I carefully removed the blade and replaced it with a wooden replica. To the untrained eye, it appeared just as formidable. Then I took the blade to a reputable pawnbroker in town. He recognized its quality and craftsmanship and offered a fair price for it. The fiddler's face shone with pride as he continued. With the money I received, I was able to purchase not just food, but also this delightful bottle of wine. While my sword might be incomplete for now, my spirit remains whole. He picked up the wooden replacement he'd crafted for his sword and showed it to the king. "This is temporary," he said, tapping the wooden blade with a chuckle, "just like the challenges we face. Tomorrow, when I earn my dues for guarding, I will retrieve my blade, melt it down, and mold it back to its original form." He continued, "Though I may not possess the skill to forge new creations from scratch, I do have a knack for repairing what's broken. And isn't that what life is all about? Taking the pieces and mending them back together." The king heard the violinist's words, and a hint of joy seeped into his heart. He hurriedly said goodbye to the violinist and excitedly returned to the harem. The evening shadows deepened as the king, after his visit to the fiddler's home, harbored a plan tinged with mischief. A frown etched on his brow, he thought. "Aha! I know how to silence the fiddler's joyous tunes." He imagined the fiddler's cheerful face turning to one of despair, a vision that brought a cruel satisfaction to his heart. Swiftly, he sought the company of his army minister, a dignified man always dressed in rich fabrics that announced his important status. Tomorrow, the king declared, gather every man, woman, and child in the square. An execution awaits them, and the fiddler will be the one to carry it out. The minister, always loyal and never one to question the king, nodded gravely. He summoned the town criers, and by dusk the news echoed throughout every street, lane, and alley of the kingdom. The townsfolk whispered in hushed tones, wondering what the new day would bring. As the moon rose high, the king settled into his plush bed, his thoughts filled with gleeful anticipation. He pictured the crowd's astonished faces when the fiddler's wooden sword would be revealed. Then the whole nation will see the deceit of the fiddler with the wooden sword. What kind of guard is he? Who can't even protect himself, let alone the king? There's no chance that they will trust him after this incident, much less offer him jobs. I promise that the violinist will be saddened, and I will be the happiest person in the entire kingdom, as it should be. With this triumphant image in mind, he drifted into a deep sleep, sure that by the next sunset, the fiddler's merry tunes would be no more. The morning dawned, and the news echoed throughout the kingdom. Heralds ventured forth, alerting the populace of the imminent execution. By noon, the vast square was alive with people, their collective whispers forming a constant hum beneath the vast sky. Faces, etched with curiosity, ranged from the innocence of children peeking from behind their parents to the weathered expressions of old men leaning on their canes. Each person, lured by the promise of a spectacle, pondered what awaited them at their king's command. Among the throng stood the violinist, feeling slightly out of place. His usual day with the royal guard had been abruptly halted. Now, clad in the king's ornate uniform, with a sword hanging by his side, he was just another face in the crowd. His gaze, however, was transfixed on the grand stage where the king, resplendent in his royal garb, addressed the masses. Beside him, a man in chains, his eyes reflecting resigned despair. The whispers quieted as the king spoke. This man stands accused of theft, deceit, and betrayal. He defied the laws I've decreed and thus deserves death. The king's gaze, sharp and unyielding, swept over the crowd, eventually resting on the violinist. You, come forth. The violinist, with trepidation evident in his steps, made his way forward. The king's voice rang out, You, violinist, are to execute this criminal for all to witness. Tears threatened to spill as he uttered, My lord, I've never taken a life. I became part of your guard just yesterday. I will not harm another. An oppressive silence emanated from the king. Then the army minister stepped forward, his intentions unmistakable. The violinist, filled with anguish, looked to the heavens and prayed, O Almighty, if you deem this man worthy of life and in your infinite mercy forgive him, let my sword be of wood and not of steel. He drew his sword with trembling hands, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. For there, catching the faint sunlight, was not a blade of steel, but one of wood. The square erupted in hushed whispers of astonishment. Many, in reverence, turned their gaze skyward, silently voicing prayers of gratitude. They now viewed the violinist not just as a musician, but as a sanctified figure elevated above the masses. The king, taken aback by the violinist's unexpected wisdom, found himself confronted by the collapse of his scheme. Marveling at the violinist's quick thinking, he chose to relent. The decrees were promptly annulled, and the kingdom swiftly reverted to its daily routine. The moral of this parable illuminates an essential truth. Our external resources are not the sole determinants of our happiness. Instead, the joy we experience largely depends on the qualities we embody, worldview we've cultivated, and the inner resources each one of us possesses. The more optimistically we perceive challenges, the clearer and more precise our course of action becomes. It is vital to always rely on oneself, to think creatively, and to understand that most difficulties can be surmounted with the right perspective. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Abigail, wishing you a peaceful night and the sweetest of dreams.